Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm trying something new right now, and I'm a little nervous about it, but we're going to try and do a Sunday school lesson here on YouTube, going through the church platform. So make sure that you have your Bibles out. We're going to start off in Luke chapter 2. What I'm going to ask you guys to do this morning is actually start by reading these verses Luke 2, verses 40 through 52. And you can pause the video right now while you find it and read it, but once you're done, I'd like you to move forward and continue with the lesson. All right. Well, as we're going through with this lesson, I'd like to start by recapping Luke 2 40 through 52 with you guys. One of the first things that we can see is going on in this lesson is that Jesus faithfully kept the customs of the Torah because his family led him in doing that. They went to the Passover celebration, they went to Jerusalem at the time they were supposed to go. And so we can see how his family is continuing to be faithful in the ways that God has asked them to be. We can also see that on their way back home, Jesus was forgotten. This is just like in all those movies where somebody's gotten left at a gas station. I remember once my mom accidentally left me in a Walmart and had to have her paged over the intercom. And that's essentially what happened to Jesus here. His parents, for whatever reason, got separated from him as he was walking back towards, as they were walking back towards Nazareth. He stayed in Jerusalem. It took them a while to find him. It was a day's journey they left before they found out that he was missing. So they had to walk back for a full day. And then it took them another day to find him. And they finally found him in the temple. And there Jesus was asking questions and listening and learning. And Jesus submitted to his parents when they finally asked him to come home. And so this is a quick recap of what we read, but what can we learn from it? And what does any of this have to do with us? Um, well, I want to try something weird. We have Instagram, we have social media, and so if you guys do have questions as we go through the lesson, or if I have questions for you, I'd like to be able to ask them there, and maybe we could collaborate a little bit. And if you get confused, it's a chance for you to ask me a question. You could always feel comfortable sending a question to your small group leader or your Sunday school teacher too, so make sure that you're texting them. But my first question for you that I'd like to see some answers on Instagram if you guys want to participate. Why do you think Jesus, as the Son of God, asked questions of teachers and religious leaders? I mean, if he's God, doesn't he just know everything? Why does he bother to ask questions? Or because he's man, does he not know everything in top of his head, but he has to ask them to know them? So I want you guys to tell me what you think. And another question I have for y'all: what are some questions you want to ask God, or some things you want to know about him? Let's imagine you were there at the temple with all of these religious leaders and scholars. What kind of things would you want to know? What would you want to listen about? But getting back to the text and what we could learn about it, I think we have a lot to learn this morning, and that's actually the first thing that I would have you guys remember. Going through this passage, we have a lot to learn. After 3 days, they found him sitting in the temple amongst the teachers, listening and asking questions. If Jesus has something to learn, then all of us do. He's God, right? And so he never did anything wrong. He lived a sinless life. And so if he feels the need to ask questions and learn, that means that all of us have the need to ask questions and learn. We should focus more on listening than being heard. This was a big problem for me when I was in Sunday school. I would always want to be heard. I would always want to show how much I know. I'd always want to make sure that that awkward silence didn't happen in Sunday school. And it's good to participate, don't get me wrong. But sometimes we need to be a little less eager to speak and a little bit more eager to listen to what others have to say. And we shouldn't be scared to ask questions. I know that statement a lot of teachers say, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And then there's people like me, when I was in middle school, I'd be like, well, if a chicken had lips, could it whistle? That comes from Even Stevens. That's an old show. But obviously there are some stupid questions. But we shouldn't be scared to ask questions because we're scared they would look stupid. Instead, what that statement's meant to say is we shouldn't be scared to be curious. If Jesus was curious enough to ask questions, then we should emulate that and we should try to be like him. And the last thing I think we can see from this verse is we need to be careful about where we're going to get our questions answered. Sometimes we ask a lot of questions and we listen to the wrong people, and it sets us back and it becomes a real problem. Jesus didn't go out into the streets, he didn't go out into the market, he didn't go out into the shadiest part of town. He sat in the temple in his father's house and he listened and asked questions. And so we need to be careful about who we're going to for our questions. Not that you should be closed-minded to anybody who doesn't think like you, but that you should recognize there are people out there that will just say stupid things. They'll have poisonous ideas that aren't good. So make sure you're careful about where you're going for these things. One of the things that we see as we're going through the Gospel Project And as we're studying all of this is the 99 essential doctrines. And one here that's talked about, and you can see pretty clearly, is Jesus' humanity. Earlier I asked you, like, why did he have to ask these questions? And the truth is, Jesus was not only fully divine, but he was also fully human. He was limited. He wasn't able to know all things off the top of his brain. And for many people, this can be confusing. So if you have some questions about Jesus being fully God and fully man, I want to encourage you to ask them on Instagram or text our Sunday school teachers. Another thing that I think we can learn from this lesson, and the last thing that I want to focus on in this video, because I know you guys don't want another 90-minute lesson, we need to obey our parents. Now look at verse 51. He went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he was obedient to them. Now, we've read the story, and I think we know what's going on. And if you haven't, pause it right now and make sure you go back and read the passage. But what essentially happened was Jesus was sitting in the temple and learning. And when his parents showed up, they were anxious and frustrated. And they're like, Jesus, what have you done to us? Like, we've been so worried about you. And Jesus basically responds with, you should have known that I would be here serving my Father. And that is a little confusing for us sometimes because it looks like Jesus is kind of backsassing them. But look here at verse 51, and we can see that that's actually the opposite of what's going on. Jesus obeyed his parents. He was obedient to them. He submitted to them. This can be a confusing topic. What does it look like for a perfect God of the universe to become a teenager and submit to his parents? And if this is something you want to look into more, I'll have an article, a resource for you guys to read about. It'll break it down a little bit more in depth than we have time right here. And you could find that below the video, the description down below, I guess, or wherever it's at on the website. But I want you to see a few things that you can learn and you could reflect on in your life as a student from this passage. And the first one would be, you don't have to be wrong for your parents to be right. Sometimes growing up, I knew that I had good intentions and I did everything that was right, and my parents would still get on to me, and I would think that's not fair. They're wrong this time. And the truth is, that's not how it works. Your parents don't have to be wrong for you to be right, or vice versa. You can both be right. You can submit to your parents even if you've done all the right things. And Jesus models that for us in a very clear way. Jesus didn't sin. He never sinned in his whole life. But he still submitted to his parents and obeyed them and went back to Nazareth. And so we can see that, it doesn't matter if we feel like we were right. We still need to submit to our parents. And the second thing I want to emphasize is your intentions probably aren't as pure as Jesus's. Maybe they were. Maybe at some point in your life you had completely good intentions and it went against what your parents wanted. But the truth is, you're not Jesus. And so we need to recognize that there's probably an element of some sin or some rebellion when we're working against our parents. And lastly, if Jesus can submit, then you can too. Jesus had every right to basically command his own mother and father. He created them, right? You can see at Hebrews chapter 1, he created the universe. And yet he was put in a place where he was to submit to them. He was their son. And so I want to tell you that if Jesus can submit, then so can you. That's all we have for today's lesson. I don't want to bog you guys down with too much, but if you have questions, please don't hesitate to text me, ask it on Instagram, reach out to your Sunday school teachers, and give us some feedback. How do you think this went? I love you guys. I want to pray for you, and then we'll be done. God, thank you so much for this opportunity for us to study your word, to continue to have the resources and abilities to gather together digitally in this time where there's a virus going on. God, throughout history, your people have faced plagues and difficulties and wars and frustrations, and you've gifted us uniquely to be in a time where we all have Bibles. We all have the technology to access each other and to encourage one another. God, I pray that we wouldn't just bunk down in our homes and play video games and TikToks and get depressed, but instead we would use these tools to encourage one another and to study and to love you and love your word. God, I pray that we would be encouraged to pray and that we'd be encouraged to read your word. Thank you guys. It was really awesome having this opportunity.